My dad's in hospital today, so I'm a little bit, but I'm eating a carrot in his honor because he's fine. He's going to be fine. He says he's just going to make some lifestyle modifications, and I said I'll do it with him. I will do more things to be kind to my organs. I will take care of my heart and intensify my efforts to eat vegetables and exercise a solid amount. So yes, but today we're talking about Hunter Biden and Mary Trump and institutionalists and what are they really protecting. So we talked about institutions yesterday and how the Catholic Church and other respected institutions sometimes contain people who make questionable moral choices because they have conflated protecting the institution with protecting the people the institution is supposed to serve. And they believe that the greater good of protecting the institution's reputation is all that they need to do. And it's not enough. So people are looking askance at Merrick Garland today. He is the he's the Attorney General, the head of the Department of Justice, a Biden appointee rather than a Trump appointee. So presumably less devoted to the goal of protecting Trump from consequence, from legal consequence, in relation to his various crimes, be they obstruction of justice crimes or other federal crimes. Whilst at state level, the New York District Attorney and the New York Attorney General, Tish James, and the Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance, are both pursuing civil and criminal cases against Trump and the Trump Organization. Yeah, Phil is feeling the pull towards cynical. So I want you to take a second, Phil. Let's all take a second. Just give ourselves a little hug and go, Americans are so much safer now as a consequence of not having self-interested criminals at the helm. So is Hunter Biden in office? No. Are any of Joe Biden's children nepotistically appointed to be White House aides? No. Is Jared Kushner still in the White House plotting to sabotage America's COVID response team so that there can be multiple deaths, hundreds of thousands of deaths that are then blamed, loudly blamed on Democratic state governors by Republicans in a cynical, exploitative way? No, that's not the case anymore. There are more good people in charge. There are incredibly efficient, well-organized people in charge who have rolled out an exemplary vaccination schedule for America that has got, at a national level, approaching 70% of adults with one vaccination dose under their belts. There are 15 southern states that aren't anywhere near approaching that level, but Biden and his administration have done all that they can. They're not purposely trying to sabotage America in order to make the case that Democratic governors in blue states should have done more. That COVID somehow wasn't a national problem, that COVID somehow wasn't serious enough to take seriously. But as Lindsey Graham yesterday argued, maybe the lab leak hypothesis, which there is no evidence for, there's no evidence conclusively either way.
On Monday, it's sports, and there's a sad face crying, really sad. And Tuesday, it's a happy with a happy face like this. Wednesday, okay, happy. Thursday, happy. Friday, okay. Saturday, A+.
Sweetie, you may never have to wear a school uniform again. That's your life where it is now. You may never have to wear a school uniform again. American kids are on holidays. My kids have 2 more weeks of homeschooling, but you don't have to wear a uniform for homeschooling. And my daughter hates uniforms. So she's made a little list with sad faces depending on the day she has to wear sports uniforms, not because she doesn't like sports, but because she prefers a dress uniform. She's A little bit of a princess, literally speaking, self-appointed princess. She wears a crown to school every day. What are they going to be like with that in Boston? Or in satellite suburbs of Boston? Would they let a 6-year-old wear a crown to school every day if she was really attached to it? Yes. Oh, Phil notes that the reason why he's worried about the whole system and 2022 and 2024 is on the horizon. Yes. Do you know what I argued a few days ago, Phil? I argued that I look to Black women. Do you know what Stacey Abrams is doing right now? She's gathering together people, volunteers, for Hot Call Summer. It's a play on words of the Hot Girl Summer. It's Hot Call Summer, to call voters in swing states regarding the necessity of passing the For the People Act, HR 1. Well, it was called HR 1 when it needed to pass the House. It's passed the House. It needs to pass the Senate. So really it's SR 1, but it's the For the People Act. And it is the act that contains provisions to strengthen Americans' access to votes. It's a countermeasure against the Republican efforts to slow roll a second insurrection, to so constrain Democratic voters that they cannot be present, that they cannot easily access the vote, that their voting is impeded in a way that Republican voters are not. Using measures that are specifically targeted towards the voting habits and ID history of Black American voters who constitute the backbone of the Democratic voting bloc. And yes, that's a concern, but look to what the helpers are doing. That's very Fred Rogers of us. Look to the helpers when you're frustrated and upset. So Stacey Abrams with Hot Call Summer, they're hoping to get 10 million volunteers. Or are they hoping to get volunteers to make 10 million calls? Either way, it's an ambitious program. Let's see if I can find the details. Phil notes that Boston is awful. Phil says to Molly, we are just holding on and McConnell is loving it. Of course. Well, you've got Joe Manchin, who is sort of outing himself as an unofficial Republican. So let me see. There's something I would like to say about that. Joe Manchin's pro-filibuster, anti-HR 1 talking points appear to be cribbed from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a Republican-aligned corporate lobbying association. So let me see. Who funds the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? Who funds the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? Looking it up on Wikipedia. Center for International Private Enterprise, National Chamber Foundation. I don't know. ExxonMobil, Facebook, General Electric, Google, Pfizer, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, Target, S&P Global, Uber. Okay, so a lot of members. Bayer, Cargill, Caterpillar, Coca-Cola. I said ExxonMobil and Facebook. So a lot of big corporate players fund that. All right, so a lot of big corporate players presumably are happy for Joe Manchin to put ankle chains on democracy because the Democrats are trying to free democracy from the impositions that Republicans are putting in the way of primarily Black voters. But
on every day, the smiley face, flower, rainbow, unikitty.
That's because you're happy to know.
Crown, jewelry.
So her favorite things. Okay. Wow. Fairy wings, clowns, jewelry, rainbows, happy faces. Very nice. So we went from sad faces to a very improved outlook for my daughter going to school in the US. Phil notes that our infrastructure in the US is in such disrepair, highways, mass transit, compared to the rest of the modern world. Absolutely. And the Democrats, did they just pass it through the Senate? They just passed through the Senate a $1 trillion package for infrastructure competitiveness. The Senate, the Senate's always the tricky one. The Senate has passed a nearly $250 billion piece of legislation. Oh no, that's not infrastructure. Sorry, Phil. That's a nearly $250 billion piece of legislation aimed at funding research and development to help the US maintain competitiveness with China. Do you know what? What is the person called who decides what can avoid the filibuster or not? It's Elizabeth McDonald, and I've forgotten what her position is called. And she turns out she's from a Democrat background, but she just kind of gets to make up what qualifies. The parliamentarian, that's the one. She's a Senate parliamentarian, so she is an unelected person on a salary of about $150,000, and she gets to make the call on some procedural interpretations. So the Democrats, who have a slim majority in the Senate, if you count Manchin as one of the Democrats, and he does count towards a tally at least, even though his behavior is Republican-oriented and very obstructive to justice and safeguarding democracy, he still counts as a number towards a tally that gives Chuck Schumer power over Mitch McConnell. So Chuck Schumer is still setting the legislative agenda, even though Republicans are currently obstructing a lot. Mitch McConnell is not setting the legislative agenda. If Mitch McConnell had the reins of the Senate Majority Leader position in his hands, he would be doing more of what Mitch McConnell does, which is appoint a whole bunch of judges who will likely rule against workers, people of color, vulnerable people, trans people, LGBTQ people. He'll make a lot of decisions that aren't just dang it decisions, but that really do hurt people. So Mitch McConnell not being Senate Majority Leader is part of the blessing of Joe Manchin having won his office in West Virginia, even though he is perpetuating a second form of Jim Crow. He is smoothing the path of Republicans who are effectuating obstacles because it's nothing to say lightly, oh, you should be able to produce your birth certificate in order to obtain vote-worthy ID. Because a lot of people who lived through segregation were not born in the hospital system, had to be born at home because their mothers were turned away from hospitals or knew to not even attempt to approach white hospitals. Frank Lentz wants to vote for my daughter in 2044. She's a good kid. We'll see where her values align as she grows up. But right now, my daughter is certainly very pro-Biden. I wouldn't say in the most well-rounded way, but she understands that. Actually, she and my son both understood when Donald Trump came out in opposition to testing, because testing would just create more cases, that was a lie, that testing doesn't create cases, it reveals cases. And when you know more, you can better direct your efforts to contain a escalating pandemic, and that without testing, you are flying blind. And if you choose to roll back testing efforts, you are effectively damning your country, your nation, the people you serve, to a disease that ravages your country and ravages your economy. So we might watch this little clip of Lindsey Graham saying, oh, if the lab leak theory proves to be true, then people will look at Trump in a different light. I think it's an extraordinary thing to say because it highlights that people do view Trump negatively, that a majority of Americans do understand that he is responsible for widespread death, devastation, and business collapse in the United States. That I don't know whether or not they understand that his son actively threw out a national testing scheme that he had been working on with a team of volunteers because Jared Kushner decided it would be more politically expedient to not have a testing strategy and instead allow the virus to continue to spread, knowing that in its initial stages, it was spreading more heavily in democratic states, in blue states, and that people could then perhaps be prevailed upon to believe that it was solely the fault of blue state governors for that they could not contain the virus. Jared Kushner didn't know at that stage that the Woodward tapes would be leaked and that we would come to know or have evidence we could readily circulate that Trump understood that the virus was airborne by at least February the 7th of 2020, that he understood it wasn't spread by touch, that it was airborne, and that makes it more difficult to contain, and that you have to have more specific efforts to target people gathering together and breathing in the same room in poor quality ventilation circumstances, that it's worthless to just sanitize surfaces if you still allow people to be near each other. You have to dissuade people from being near each other and from breathing in each other's vicinity because it's airborne. It's not just spread by large droplets that quickly fall to the ground because they're heavy. It's spread by small enough particles that people emanate from their respiratory system that hang suspended in the air for a bit. So you can breathe it in if you are close to someone, or if a air conditioner is blowing air towards you, or you remain in a room with someone for an extended period of time. It can be as little as 15 minutes. And with the new highly transmissible variants that have emerged around the world since Trump left office, you can catch it apparently as quickly as passing someone in a shop if there's poor ventilation and there's been an accumulation of viral particles around someone. So say someone's standing there looking at phones in a shop. This happened in Australia a few weeks ago, by the way. Someone in a phone shop, a mobile service provider shop, was looking at phones. Someone passed by them and contracted the disease. So that city went back down into lockdown. And Australia's suffering because, they needed a faster vaccination rollout, such as the one America is getting under Biden and Harris. Molly made a point. I'm working on getting Democrats out to vote in 2020. In 2022. It worked in 2020, but a lot of voters don't understand the importance of midterm elections. And to clarify further, Molly, or to expand on your point, a lot of Democrats don't understand the importance of midterm elections. It has typically been more a Republican point of pride to vote in every election, whereas Democrats are more big picture oriented and turn out for what seems to be really consequential elections, such as the presidential election. But it means they're ignoring the civics lesson of a 3-branch system of government, that the president does not control the entire government. He is the head of one branch of government. There is also the legislative branch, and that is Congress, and they have midterm elections. And if you get complacent because you succeeded in the presidential election and you let your negative partisanship energy dissipate. Negative partisanship is the energy you get when your candidate loses, and you feel very motivated to remedy that injustice by going out and ensuring that you and everybody you know votes the next time around. So Republicans have that energy, not just for presidential elections, but historically speaking, in recent years, have had that energy in midterms as well. And that's taken Democrats by surprise countless times. Not that they even noticed, otherwise you couldn't be taken by surprise countless times. They have failed to pay attention to Republicans gaining ground in midterm elections. They've listened to pundits who instead say, oh, what did Obama do wrong to have a depressed turnout? He didn't do anything wrong. It's the people relaxing because they are so high on the satisfaction of having achieved having an intelligent, successful, competent black man in office after the ravages of having an incompetent Republican president in office who once again ran the economy into the ground as Republicans habitually do, because their legislative priorities in the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch, when Conservatives are elected there, is to preserve a status quo of white wealthy dominance, and to sell that, to leave out the word wealthy and to sell it still implicitly as white dominance to even lower income white people, to sell them on the idea that the most important priority is to keep out migrants from the borders, that the most pressing need is to ensure the integrity of the borders so that non-white people can't pour in and invade and take and steal. And all of those metaphors are all destructive to the capacity of conservative Americans to recognize the truth that America is built first on the exploited labor of slaves, but secondly on the not donated, but the mutually beneficial system of migrants bringing their entrepreneurial energy and zest and educational standards to the US and are rewarded by having access to opportunities that they might not have had in their homeland. Yes, Phil, if Trump is not held accountable, but you can't ignore the ways in which Trump is currently on a passageway to being held accountable. So you can't ignore the fact that Tish James is moving forward with a prosecution, that she and Cy Vance are sharing prosecutors, that a grand jury has been impaneled, that the controller of the Trump organization testified to that grand jury a few days ago. These are all signs. So recognize that Democrats have a tendency to notice what's negative, to notice what's going on. That's our job, because Republicans have co-opted the idea of patriotism, cheering unconditionally for the United States. So Democrats have filled that space of, well, we need to see what's not perfect about our country so we can have a more informed movement towards a more perfect union. Does that make sense? We have habituated ourselves to finding what's wrong. And it's necessary for us to do that. We have to hold Merrick Garland to account. We have to ask that the Department of Justice not just devote itself to institutional protection, to protecting the reputation of the DOJ, because that reputation is suffering at the moment. People are concerned that the Department of Justice officials chose to ask to be allowed to represent Donald Trump's interests in a defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll. We don't want the Department of Justice and taxpayer dollars going to Trump's defense in a defamation case where a woman is suing him for saying not only that she lied about him raping her in a change room. It wasn't Bloomingdale's, I misspoke yesterday. It's another store that I'm not familiar with. But in a New York change room of a shop in New York, that he raped her, and Trump said she was lying, but also said she was claiming that because she was trying to sell copies of a new book. So she's perfectly within her rights to claim that he defamed her, and the Department of Justice won't really have a legal leg to stand on to say, oh, well, Trump had to say she was selling her book. She was lying to sell copies of a book in the course of the execution of his duties as president. You don't have to do that. You can just ignore someone. Look at Biden cheerfully ignoring Tara Reade, who's still burbling around on the internet, claiming that he digitally raped her in a Senate corridor of the Capitol. Phil gave me this Super Clap Award, which I hope means I've cheered him up, or I've helped cheer him up by highlighting, that whilst vigilance is still required, we have to make sure we appreciate the good things that are happening. Mary Trump apparently said on MSNBC that she is sure that Trump would turn on his own kids in an effort to keep out of jail. Marsha's here. Hello, Marsha. Nice to see you. Hello, Frank. Frank mentions a strange headline today. I wonder what it is that you're referencing. The graph on screen is something illustrating that Donald Trump has less likes. The likes and shares of Donald Trump's statements before social media ban from Twitter and Facebook and after. And you can see there's still a bit of yellow. He's still receiving some likes and shares, but it's less. It's less. The New York Times journalist did an analysis to ask, has he really been silenced? And they want to say no, which of course he hasn't. There's still 72 million people who voted for him, and a subset of that who are true Trump believers. Some people, I think it's under-acknowledged that a lot of people voted for Trump because they wanted what he claimed to be true. They voted for a parallel universe in which Trump was truthful and COVID wasn't a big deal and it wasn't going to be necessary to have any more lockdowns. And they were told that if Biden was in office, the lockdowns would continue. So it was a choice between hardship or less hardship for them. Now, of course, Trump lied, and his lies were a significant factor in perpetuating the hardship of lockdowns and the hardship of losing people to COVID and the hardship of long COVID experienced by millions of people. The brain fog, the depleted cardiac function, the impaired kidney functioning and liver functioning, because COVID is a vascular disease that can impair all the organs in your body that require blood to pass through your small arteries and veins. Phil says, Dav, you're the best. Until the R's are defeated and go down in defeat, though, it's hard to be positive here. Well, maybe we can spend a little bit of time looking up fair fight action as well. I think I've got something about that in my bookmarks today, because Stacey Abrams is launching an effort and somebody else's as well. So the good sign first is Trump's likes and shares are low. I'm happy for him not to be ignored altogether, because he still exists and he still has a base that are loyal and whose ideas still need to be challenged. So you don't have to do anything specifically to counteract that. It's part of the unfolding of information, the part of stories of people's arrests leaking out, the fact that they now denounce the lies that they were told that led them to go and put their lives on the line to fight police officers and attack police officers defending the Capitol, and that they did so because they were incited to violence by Donald Trump and his foot soldiers in the Republican Party. I'm going to call them foot soldiers. Trump foot soldiers. Trump's whole reign has been a wake-up for the opportunity, an invitation to a wake-up call for Americans to realize that they are living in a country which has a baked-in propensity to cater to rural minorities. It has a baked-in set of affirmative action principles, even in the Constitution. The Electoral College is a system of giving an advantage to states with smaller populations. It's not for fairness, because fairness is still one vote is one vote. So it's a distortion of the principle of one person, one vote in favor of people who live in states with more land than voters. Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota. Their votes expand in influence because of the Electoral College system. Oh, it's an odd headline, Ari, the Biden Department of Justice, Trump acting in an official capacity. Well, I have seen some people argue that they're protecting the right of the Department of Justice to act for the president if the president is accused of defamation going forwards. But I can also see why people would be repelled by that, the Department of Justice having at least the appearance of aligning itself with Trump, who has committed genocide against the American people. So he's not everybody's favorite person, understandably, and people are hyper-vigilant against any association between the new Department of Justice and the previous president. All right. Texas businesses. So Ron DeSantis is still trying to set up Republicans as acting in opposition to science. He's still trying to avail himself of the benefits of pursuing a contrarian policy line. So the vaccination records, this isn't Ron DeSantis, this is Texan Governor Greg Abbott doing something similar. Texas businesses that require customers to be vaccinated will be denied state contracts and could lose their license or operating permits under legislation that Governor Abbott says he plans to sign into law on Monday. So that's government punishing business. Doesn't sound very traditionally Republican, because the Republican position is traditionally to say we hate government, we want to favor businesses. But I would just like to note, it makes more sense if you understand that that's a cover story for preserving white dominance. So that you say, I'm anti-big government, but what you're really anti about big government is big government making it illegal to discriminate against Black people and illegal to prevent Black people from accessing the ballot box and illegal to discriminate against gay people or women. That's the big government that is truly the foundation of most libertarian and conservative ideologies, even if they're couched in pseudo-intellectual language, worshipping the power of the free market as if it's inherently in opposition to the principle of big government. Democrats say, no, big government and businesses can work together. My children, babies, sweetie pie, you have to be good, darling. Sort it out nicely. I think they're arguing about what's stuff that you pop called? Little bits of popping thing that comes to safe pack. Bubble wrap. They're arguing over bubble wrap. Yes, a story about Joe Manchin saying for months Democrats have delicately danced around Joe Manchin, giving him space and hoping he would eventually come around to support a sweeping voting rights bill. And it's not just to protect voting rights, it's to use federal law to prevent Republican-controlled state legislatures from overturning election results they don't like and making it legal for judges, conservative-appointed judges, to overturn election results without even having any evidence that they can point to say, no, we believe. It's so funny because it is a Republican talking point or a conservative talking point to say facts over your feelings. They want to be able to overturn an election based on their feelings of not liking the results, or claiming that we sense that this is all horribly unfair. Yes, we've lost 62 court cases from Trump trying to say the election was unfair, but we don't like that either. We don't like those court cases. So we're just hoping that at some point there will be conservative judges who are prepared to say, Trump should have won the election, or Governor Abbott should have won the election. Kemp should have won. We can feel it. We saw a lot of boats. We saw a lot of boats with Trump signs. We saw a lot of houses. We feel in our hearts that Trump won. We feel in our hearts that conservatives and Republicans won an election. One thing I'd like to note as well is that 25 states with GOP lawmakers are ending emergency employment aid in order to pressure and punish jobless workers, which means some people are getting forced back to work even though they're still worried about COVID and don't have access to childcare yet. So that's a problem for vulnerable people, but it's a problem if Republicans are still able to communicate to them that only the Republican Party cares and the Democratic Party is just about elites trying to impose academic culture on America and saying you have to change the language you use about people, etc., etc. Language is just one of the arguments about discrimination. There's a lot of other arguments about how to stop America's patterns of habituated discrimination and prejudice. Lots of different arguments. So, and some of those arguments favor the interests of working people and wage earners. Because if you've seen the news story in the New York Times, ProPublica journalists researched the effective tax rates paid by billionaires such as Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, etc., and Elon Musk, and worked out that they effectively pay less than 1% tax. Elon Musk was the largest sucker because he paid an effective tax rate of 3.5%. Or was it 3.8? I wrote it down, so I'll have a look. Okay. At least once in the past 15 years, billionaires Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Michael Bloomberg, Carl Icahn, and George Soros literally paid nothing in federal income taxes. From 2014 to 2018, Warren Buffett paid a true tax rate of 0.1%. Bezos paid a true tax rate of 0.98%. Bloomberg, 1.3%. And Musk, 3.27%. So the underlying assumption is sometimes, oh, well, you have to let billionaires make as much money as they can. And the billionaire perspective of, well, even if I pay 1% tax, that's still more than you pay because in real terms, my 1% of my income is worth so much more. I'm giving so much more back to America than you're giving. But when you look at it in terms of comparative rates, then you can say, well, no, you're benefiting more than 1% from the infrastructure of the United States. So it's not okay for you to let America's infrastructure crumble while you use tax loopholes and tax avoidance strategies to pay a true tax rate of less than 1%. Economist Gabrielle Zuckman, a leading authority on American and global wealth inequality, said, it was always clear that the top billionaires don't pay much tax, but even I'm surprised at how low their effective tax rate is. So now, in order to not sound like a communist, I can say, look, I'm not like some people who say, oh, we should just eat the rich, we should take all their money from them. That's not the principles of America that most people have signed on to, which is you have freedom, you let people pursue wealth if that's their thing, as long as you let other people live and have a living wage and pursue comfort and happiness at their own level. But when you point out to people the tax system is playing favorites, that over time, sweeties, that's not okay. I know you still giggles, all right. That over time, the pendulum has swung too far towards the millionaire side and that they're accruing too many advantages, that is relatively disadvantaging wage earners because they can't escape paying tax. That it's not okay for rich people to avoid their responsibilities to proportionately contribute back to the society that has scaffolded their wealth-creating opportunities. And yes, part of Elon Musk's billions of dollars are a product of Elon earning green tax credits because of his adoption and promotion of relatively green technologies of electric cars. So yes, taxpayer money is enriching Elon Musk, and he's paying an effective tax rate of 3.27%. Oh, did you get them cookies, darling?
Hey guys.
And strawberries.
Jamie? Yeah. Which tray would you like?
My husband's being helpful. That's called co-parenting. Because that was hard for me. I can hear them playing a game which is quite freaky. And freaks and broadcasts. And the mummy's heart is not a good mix. Thank you, darling.
Cookies and fruit.
Cookies and fruit. Balanced diet. Molly notes that there will be protests coming up. Voters aren't happy. Yeah, voters aren't happy because America has a political system that overly favors wealth minorities. So I wanted to say minorities, and then I realized it sounds like I'm saying race, ethnic-based minority groups. No, I'm saying minority, ideological minorities. Also, I should write that down because you do need to make it more clear. America's political system has some structural deficits. Actually, they're not deficits. They were put in purposefully. They were put in purposefully as a compromise to attract the buy-in of slave owners to the founding of America. There was an electoral college system put in to reassure slave owners that abolitionists would never get the better of them. It was built in as a preservation for the system of wealth creation through slavery. And eventually it was overcome, and there was a civil war fought to say, no, look, we've defeated you. Even with the Electoral College, Abraham Lincoln's in power. He's an abolitionist. He's the president, so you just have to suck it up. You can't just rely on those compromises that were made to reassure you. That's kind of false reassurance. It's, thank you, that slavery would be able to exist in perpetuity. So, yeah, I can see why the South felt gypped, but it's still immoral to be attached or to maintain an attachment to the idea that you should be allowed to run an economic system based on enslaving human beings. So the South could have and should have sucked it up, but they've had some difficulties along the way. So now listen, I said Trump foot soldiers, not deficits. What did I want to say? Baked in preferencing to accommodate slave owners, to accommodate the wishes of slave owners for slavery to exist in perpetuity. In defiance of abolitionists. Perpetuity in defiance of abolitionists. Okay. So Marsha's terrified about it, and we cannot become complacent, and Biden has to start playing hardball big time. True, but we also put Biden in office. So sometimes we're terrified, not just that Biden might be complacent, but that people will become complacent. Biden's trying to show us that he cares. He appointed Kamala Harris to be the head of the voter protection efforts, the efforts to have a federal level push for legislation that will protect not just the rights of voters, but specifically the rights of African American voters, the rights of Black voters who find themselves to be the targets of Republicans because they're an relatively easy target for Republicans. Republicans have done the research. They know which population groups are less likely to have a birth certificate, or whose elderly voters are less likely to have a birth certificate, owing to America's fairly recent history of excluding Black Americans from hospital settings where birth certificates are issued. Oh, Heather Cox Richardson has a book called How the South Won the Civil War. As long as the minority party rules change is hard, we are to a degree captive to the Electoral College. But again, look, Abraham Lincoln won the presidency even with his abolitionist leanings. Not that he was purely in favor of equality for Black people, because he still wasn't, but he was at least opposed to the morality, he was opposed to the immorality of generating profit en masse from the enslaved labor of humans. So hardball tactics pull federal resources out of West Virginia unless Manchin comes around. Oh, did LBJ do that to people? Let's have a look. A lot of people in Iowa don't wear masks. They think that COVID is fake. So yes, I'm concerned for a summer surge of COVID in the relatively under-vaccinated southern states. So yes, even though Heather Cox Richardson is likely right when she wrote a book called How the South Won the Civil War, because they did come back after Reconstruction, and they in 1876 were able to overturn the results of an election in a way by requiring the government that won that election to compromise by withdrawing federal troops from the southern states. So they got what they wanted. They got to roll back some of the gains of the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. And when I say gains, I mean gains for Black Americans, because every push for Black civil rights, every push that succeeds in advancing the lives and the opportunity access points for Black people is met by backlash and pushback from white people whose worldviews are too inflexible to cope with evidence of Black success, who have to try and minimize the opportunities for Black people to succeed and maximize the opportunities for people to kill and harm and persecute people of color. So yes, yesterday I was hopeful, not massively hopeful, but I was slightly hopeful that a big meeting of civil rights and voting rights with Joe Manchin from people from NAACP, National Urban League Civil Rights Organizations, NAACP, the National Coalition on Black Civil Participation, and the National Council of Negro Women would maybe get through to him, but I think he feels like he's just so special and being specially propped up by the US Chamber of Commerce. So yeah, clearly the pressure on Joe Manchin has to intensify to overcome all of the baked-in rationalizations that Manchin has regarding serving the interests of his masters in the US Chamber of Commerce. Here is a Lincoln Project ad in which they highlight the fight against fascism, because it's June the 6th, 1944 was D-Day, leading to Nazi Germany's surrender less than a year later. So they say the work of opposing fascism is American as apple pie. And as we face the rise of right-wing fascism, that work must go on. Now, I very much endorse this sentiment because I have been working against fascism for 3 years, and I am moving to America, so here I am, finding a pursuit that I've been engaged in extensively for 3 years is as American as apple pie. So let's put that on the screen. Nope, it is not loading. Indoor Smokers is here. Hello, hello. Lincoln Project rocks. Yes, I know a lot of people who didn't believe that they would still be on the side of the Democrats going forward, and they have been. They've been very staunch in their opposition to Republican traitors, Republican seditionists and insurrectionists. They haven't been afraid to call out people from their former party, their former allies, for supporting anti-America legislative moves, anti-voting. They're calling out fascism, and that's really important to me. I'm sorry I can't show you this ad right now. It's not loading. Can you hear my daughter? She's quite the emphatic vocalist. Molly says, I noticed that people here are still wearing masks indoors, which is great because you're in Pennsylvania. That's a battleground state. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, some of the battleground states of the electoral college system, which shows there's a culture of subscribing to science. So every evidence of people supporting science is evidence of people who are too smart to stay invested in the Republican Party for long, or at least are more likely to have a reason to be less motivated to turn out in midterm elections. So we can't just presume that those dynamics will continue, of Republicans always being very motivated to turn out to protect their pocketbooks. Because you know what hurt their pocketbooks is Republican negligence in the face of a pandemic. Republican refusal to use the mechanisms of government to help prevent further loss and suffering, economic loss, loss of health, loss of life. Republicans did not look after Americans at a state level, but critically at a federal level where the federal government has hugely expensive organizations organized around the idea of giving the president the best quality information. That's something Americans pay for, and the rest of the world doesn't have it. Trump has 18 different intelligence agencies feeding him information, has employees all over the world. Now, Trump disbanded the pandemic response unit. Trump collapsed a lot of funding for the organizations and for the employees who were supposed to keep a lookout for things like an escalating underreported pandemic in different nations such as China. And that all collapsed. Everything that Americans had paid for was eroded and was taken away from them and made them less safe. And that recognition will not penetrate the brains of every Republican voter. But even if it erodes some of the enthusiasm that Republicans have for turning out to midterms, if their conscience smokes them a bit, if they see a Lincoln Project ad and think, yeah, Republicans really haven't done a great job, if their threat perception is more weighted on the very real outcome of Republican negligence from 2020 relative to the made-up threat descriptions of Republicans in office now, where they say, no, you still have to fear caravans of migrants. You still have to fear Joe Biden turning you all into communists and communists taking everything from you. The ability of those made-up fears to get through to Republicans and energize them to turn out to vote is impacted by the loss of Republican credibility as they still insist that something that was internationally televised, the insurrection, didn't happen or has been misrepresented. People's ability to say, oh, mainstream media lies, but Republicans are telling me the truth, that has to have been impacted. And I'm not going to rely on me saying it has to, because wishful thinking and motivated thinking is not a good ground for making decisions or basing your feelings on. So instead, I'm going to point to the New Mexico election results and say that is a sign that the voters did not turn against the Democrats because of Republican campaigns, scare campaigns about Democrats defunding the police. People on social media have a new slogan. When they hear about police atrocities, they say, police the police, i.e., make sure the police know that there are consequences. They are not above the law. They should be adequately trained and disabused of the notion that they can kill with impunity, because Derek Chauvin is in prison and he's likely to attract a long jail sentence. So police the police. Take videos of them, watch them, report on them, have citizens oversight boards where people look at the actual curriculum being administered to police who are training and say, hey, that curriculum is heavy on using materials that just show Black people doing things. So you have to make sure you're not just training them to look at every Black person they meet as a criminal suspect who should be restrained using every means possible, should be shot at, should be killed if they try and leave when police officers are trying to make them stay, which is a dynamic that sets up police officers to extrajudicially murder Black Americans at disproportionately high rates. So I'm talking, and I don't know entirely if this is resonating with anybody right now. We haven't had a comment for a little bit. I should get this black box out of the corner because I can't produce a Lincoln Project ad at this point. My husband's giving me water. I'm going to drink some. Marsha's listening. Awesome. I'm glad to know you're still there, Marsha. Thank you. I try not to ask for reassurance that people are still out there too much. With HAPS, I can see the cumulative number of people that have tuned in at any given point, but I don't know how many people are currently watching. So I'm glad you were there and could reach out. Rob Reiner posted a comment that's saying, having a lunatic criminal in the White House for 4 years has infected a big swathe of the population with a lunacy virus. If we don't inoculate ourselves with voting rights, it will become a pandemic called fascism. Yes. I think some of the steam went out of fascism, but it's still there. Hitler was in jail for a while and he came out and managed to gain access to power and then installed himself as a dictator. So you can't rest on your laurels and say, we evicted Trump from office, we defeated him. The spirit of Trumpism, the use of Trump as a rallying point to get people to donate money, to get people to believe lies, to get people to be emotionally susceptible to fabricated narratives that falsely inflate certain situations as threats. That say, look, here is a story of a crime that a migrant committed against a native-born American, therefore you should fear migrants and you should accept that that's the biggest threat faced by Americans. Or each demographic in the US has a population that commits crimes, but that population is lower. The percentage of undocumented migrants who commit crimes is lower than the percentage of American-born Americans who commit crimes. And we have to find words and find ways to challenge those assumptions that native-born Americans are more entitled, more legitimate. Yes. There was a study done, this is so important, that shows FEMA aid, federal aid, disproportionately goes to white families and goes less to Black Americans. Disproportionately benefits white communities, white dominant communities, and disproportionately is withheld from Black communities. And it's great that they've done the work to look at that data. Data is worth 100 personal observations, but personal observations are still important to resonate with people and tell a story. But if you can substantiate that with well-researched data, not motivated, Republican-funded, made-up data, but peer-reviewed quality data, it's worth a lot. Marsha says, we are here. Sometimes I am digesting it all. This is true. Sometimes I speak in a dense way that might be more suited for writing, where people are more prepared to hear complicated things and to have the opportunity to read a passage back. So I'm still on the trajectory of trying to persuade myself to write things, but maybe in the US, when my children actually attend school once again, and I'm eating more vegetables and getting a better sleep cycle because my husband will no longer be working hours corresponding with half a world away. Fingers crossed. I do throw a song in once in a while, true. I was asked to sing the other day and I promised to work on a song. Uh-oh, my babies look like they need my help. No, they're just doing fun dramas. Yes, Indoor Smoker says his blog was a failure. It was getting 15,000 hits a day. Yes, his supporters don't seem to be blog readers. And he had to close his blog because it was humiliating that those low numbers were being reported on. It's not just humiliating, it's detrimental to his cause of putting out a strongman narrative. And it's hard to fit losing an election with a strongman narrative. Trump's angle on that is to say, I've lost. You've been stolen from. That's a strong assertion to make, to say, you should all get behind me. But they did all get behind him, and then the most motivated of those who were behind him, they didn't just donate to him, they donated almost their lives to him. 5 people killed, one of them a police officer, but Ashley Babbitt lost her life. Another man electrocuted tased his own testicles until he died of a heart attack. And another woman was trampled to death in the pinnacle of Trump's support, of saying, okay, we've heard your story, we believe your strongman assertion that you've been the victim of theft, and that theft from you is theft from all of us, so we've got your back, and we will fight for the America that we believe in, and we will break the law, invade the Capitol, seek to delay the confirming of the Electoral College, the certification of the Electoral College results. They did that. That was the peak of a frenzy of Trump support. So I do think it's down from here. And I do think we need to remember that when we feel despondent, because we do still need to deal with the landmines that Bill Barr might have planted in the Department of Justice, the cases that Bill Barr might have started that are there to advance corruption, that are there to ensure people who broke the law don't have to face consequence. That's hard, and Merrick Garland has to be really committed to the task of changing course. And I'm glad that America's eyes are on him and that Rachel Maddow is helping that, because it's important. It's important that people make it known that they expect the Department of Justice to rehabilitate itself after what it was perverted into through the machinations of Bill Barr and the other attorney generals that worked there under Trump. Jeff Sessions, even though he did one ethical thing of recusing himself from the Russia investigation after Senator Al Franken helped expose Jeff Sessions as having lied about his contacts with the Russian ambassador. There have been a lot of corrupt dealings. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was corruptly reassuring the public that the Mueller investigation would proceed unimpeded. And in the background, he was assisting Bill Barr to misrepresent the findings of the Mueller report and the implications of the Mueller report to the American people, as Bill Barr falsely told the media and told the public, the watching public, that the Mueller report exonerated Trump of obstruction of justice and of colluding with the Russian government. We now know that, yes, not only was there evidence in the Mueller report to support I'm seeing the number 8 up there, but it's 10 distinct charges of obstruction of justice, but that there was also a lot of substance that Mueller had begun to uncover with regards to collusion with Russia. That in the Mueller report is documented evidence that Ricky Gates and Paul Manafort gave polling data to a Russian intelligence operative, Konstantin Kilimnik. That is collusion. That is evidence of a secret parallel campaign being run by the Russian government, creating a situation in which campaign candidate Trump became President Trump, beholden for secret electoral assistance to Vladimir Putin. And having a president who was beholden to a Russian president whose political goals were to undermine American democracy so that he could laugh at it to his people and show them that it's not worth aspiring to being in a democracy because it's not all that it's cracked up to be, and democracy's lame anyway. Donald Trump hurting America was part of Vladimir Putin's illustration program to claim that democracy is all a hypocritical mess anyway. Molly says it's nice to see parenting where a child's spunkiness isn't squelched. Oh, good. I'm glad you appreciate that. My daughter's so spunky. She put on a hat today and she pretended to be a little old farmer, and she picked me with a walking stick and said, "Get off my crops, they need to grow." I think I can play you a tiny video of it. It took a few seconds. Just her accent just blew me away. Okay. Get off my crops. Let them grow. Yeah. Oh, are we speaking in French? Bien sûr. Active smoker says, I get more hits than that. Oh, sorry, indoor smokers says, I get more hits than that on my YouTube channel, lol. Yes, the 15,000 average hits that Trump was getting on his blog. And I heard, this is the most embarrassing detail for Trump, I heard that once you liked something on his Donald Trump website, you couldn't retract the like. So if you liked it, it stayed liked. Like, you can't withdraw love from Donald Trump. You can only give love to Donald Trump. She is like a little performer already. I'm glad you liked it, Marsha. It is hysterical. I wonder if there can be a profession for people who can just hire their talents to different companies, good companies, hopefully, where you can make interesting meetings more interesting, where you can try and get across a topic and make presentations on behalf of companies and be like fresh blood brought in to liven a company up. So maybe your employees don't really want to hear from the CEO or the head of marketing today. Hire somebody who's going to come in and read a A4 page dot points about what needs to be said and then say it for you in a lively fashion. I would do that job. Anyway, I've been talking for an hour, which means it's time for me to go and help my children make sure they get their schoolwork done. So I will say thank you so much for tuning in to the Pro-Democracy Variety Hour once again. Sorry I couldn't share clips from the Lincoln Project with you, but I refer you to their Twitter page. It has some quality material, and I still support what they're doing, which is getting attention as an outlier. They're not Democrats. They are an unusual phenomenon that your brain is drawn to try and explain it. Yes, the human brain is drawn to outliers, things that are incongruous in an environment. So we are drawn to a flash of orange that might signify a saber-toothed tiger is hiding in the grass. Our attention is drawn to something that is incongruous with our expectations. We expect Republicans just to be Republicans, but the Lincoln Project is former Republicans saying we condemn Republicans. That is a novel phenomenon in politics. It draws attention. It intrigues people. It compels Republicans to answer that question. Why would former Republicans be so active in denouncing Donald Trump and denouncing his allies and associates? And Donald Trump helps supply them with answers to that. Says, they're jealous, they're failures, they're losers. It's not an adequate answer to what could drive them. The Trump campaign is still campaigning. They're campaigning for Trump to be reinstated. But even as fascism still clearly is burbling away in the background, I believe it is in the anticlimactic stage where we still need to maintain vigilance, because sometimes anticlimax situations and dynamics can lull people into a false sense of security. But if you're watching the show, then presumably you're already alive to the dangers that threaten America's functional democracy, with its flawed but functional democracy, functional enough to kick a tyrant out of office. Mummy's coming, Baba. It's time to do schoolwork anyway. I'll see you all tomorrow, hopefully, or at some point in the future. Thanks for listening. Take care and goodbye. And I'll keep working on that song. Maybe tomorrow I'll have time. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, she does have drama. Bye, Marsha, Molly, Phil, Frank. Anybody else? That might be all. Okay. Okay, cheers. Cheers, good night, have a great rest.